Imagine a nation with thousands of years of history, its own government, its own currency, its own army, and a culture unlike any of its neighbors. Now imagine that nation being invaded, occupied, and erased from the map, while the world did nothing. That nation still exists today, but most people have forgotten it. This is the story of Tibet, the forgotten nation that still exists. The year is 1950. The world is still recovering from World War II, while the Korean War is breaking out. And in the heart of Asia, one of the most significant invasions of the modern era is quietly taking place. On October 7th, 40,000 Chinese soldiers crossed into Tibet. On the other side, just 8,000 poorly equipped Tibetan troops. Within weeks, Tibet's defenses collapsed. By the next year, Tibet had effectively ceased to exist as an independent nation. But the story didn't end there. This was just the beginning of a systematic erasure. To understand how this could happen, we have to go back in time. Tibet wasn't always a small, isolated state. In the 7th century, under Emperor Songtsen Gampo, Tibet conquered vast lands and even occupied the Chinese capital of Chang'an in 763. The land itself was a fortress, the Tibetan plateau, called the roof of the world, averaging 14,000 feet high, surrounded by mountains and hostile terrain. But what made Tibet unique was its transformation into a theocracy. From the 13th century, Tibetan Buddhism shaped the entire state. The Dalai Lama was both spiritual and political leader. For centuries, this created a civilization unlike any other in Asia. By the early 1900s, Tibet functioned as a de facto independent nation. It had its own government, currency, army, postal system, and foreign policy. After 1912, Tibet expelled Chinese officials and governed itself for nearly 4 decades. But the problem was clear. Almost no country recognized its independence. On paper, Tibet looked like a state. In practice, it was invisible to the international community. That diplomatic ambiguity would be fatal. In 1949, Mao Zedong's Communist Party took control of China. One of its first priorities was Tibet. Beijing claimed Tibet had always been part of China and framed the invasion as liberation from feudal oppression. But to Tibetans, it was an invasion. The power imbalance was impossible to overcome. China had millions of battle-hardened troops. Tibet had just a few thousand men with outdated weapons. The outcome was decided before the first battle. By 1959, tensions exploded. Rumors spread that China would kidnap or kill the young 14th Dalai Lama. Tens of thousands surrounded his palace to protect him. But in secret, disguised as a soldier, he escaped at night. After 15 days crossing the Himalayas, he reached India. There he founded a government in exile that still exists today. Over 130,000 Tibetans fled with him. Back in Lhasa, the uprising was crushed with overwhelming force. Monasteries were shelled. Aircraft attacked civilians. Thousands were killed. Estimates range from 10,000 to 87,000. After this, China dismantled traditional Tibetan society. Monks were imprisoned. The Tibetan language was suppressed. Settlers were brought in. The United Nations would later call this a cultural genocide. In 1965, China established the Tibet Autonomous Region. In theory, it meant autonomy. In practice, every top official has always been Han Chinese, never Tibetan. The region is one of the most tightly controlled places on Earth, with constant surveillance and heavy militarization. Since 2009, more than 160 Tibetans have set themselves on fire in protest. Even displaying a photo of the Dalai Lama can lead to arrest. Meanwhile, the world looked away. No country today recognizes Tibet as independent. Not the United States, not India, not Europe. The reason is simple. China is too powerful, too important economically, too influential diplomatically. No government is willing to confront Beijing over Tibet, and yet, Tibetan identity survives. The Exile community works tirelessly to keep its culture alive. The Dalai Lama remains one of the most famous religious leaders in the world. Tibetan language and Buddhism endure despite pressure. Resistance continues, even at enormous risk. The tragedy of Tibet is not just that it was conquered, but that it was forgotten. A nation that once existed on the roof of the world, with its own army, culture, and history, erased while the world did nothing. Today, Tibet is both present and absent. It exists as a people, as a culture, as a memory, but not as a country. And this shows us a hard truth. In the modern world, history and identity mean little without power, geography, and economic importance. Tibet had all the culture in the world, but no allies, no recognition, and no military strength. And so, it vanished from the map. If this story surprised you, subscribe for more forgotten nations, disputed borders, and hidden history that explain how our world really works.